Corruption Watch and the Public Affairs Research Institute have written an open letter to President Cyril Ramaphosa and Finance Minister Tito Mboweni. Now, they're worried about weaknesses in the procurement system that leads to high levels of corruption. The organizations are calling for Ramaphosa and Mboweni to show the required political will needed to ensure that South Africa's public procurement system is efficient, fair, and transparent. For more on this now, let's bring in Dr Thokozani Chilenga-Butao, who's an associate with the Public Affairs Research Institute. Doc, thanks very much for your time and welcome to the AM Report. As a start, perhaps outline for us what about the regulatory framework in its current form is problematic.
The first issue and the main issue with the regulatory framework is that it is complicated, it is fragmented, it is inconsistent, and there are many pieces of legislation that try to cover public procurement as it stands. The Public Procurement Bill would be a bill that brings together the different types of legislations, which in turn increase the amount of loopholes available for issues such as corruption to take place. So the Public Procurement Bill would bring together a consistent, single framework from which all government departments can work with concerning public procurement.
I can't think of a climate more relevant now for a type of bill like this to be seen through. What are the challenges that you're meeting to try and see to this end?
So the first challenge, of course, is COVID-19. The bill has been released for comment, and that was earlier this year. However, given COVID-19 and the fact that we're now in a national disaster, although level 2, government is understandably more concerned with ensuring that this pandemic is handled well. The second obstacle is that civil society in general is not sure whether their concerns are being heard when those concerns are raised. So comments that have been sent for the Public Procurement Bill haven't received any sort of response or acknowledgement, hence this letter where we would like to make sure that those concerns still stay front of mind, especially given the scale of corruption to do with COVID-19 and pandemic-related efforts.
Yeah, and that's quite interesting because you'd imagine at the very least that, there'd be a real concerted effort to try and ensure that we put this behind us. If we were to, let's say, for instance, make some of these procurement tenders public, it doesn't necessarily go the full way of ensuring that, for instance, government is getting value for money with the tenders that we end up going for as a state. How do we guard against, the real dog work that still needs to be done, even if it becomes a public process, so to speak?
So one of the suggestions that Parry has made is that there need to be more procurement officials in government, people who are skilled and who are trained in this particular area. So if you're dealing with transport, you would look for someone who is skilled and professional and an expert in logistics. In the same way, we can't leave government procurement to chance. We need professionals who are able to, firstly, understand the system as it presently works. Secondly, to understand any changes or amendments that would take place if this bill is to be passed. And thirdly, who would be able to implement it and implement it in a system which is generally plagued with corruption, state capture, issues of fruitless and wasteful expenditure. We need people who are on the ground implementing this bill if it is passed, who are professional and who know what they're doing, and not just leaving it up to different departments in government to see through procurement.
Does it make any pronouncement, the bill that is, on whether or not, the state should make an allowance for relatives of politicians or government officials to even be part of a process like PPE procurement or procurement for anything for that matter, because this has been a big talking point in the lead up to the outcry over corruption related to COVID-19 funds. Does the bill at least try to address that in any way?
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question? I didn't catch that.
Sure. Does the bill, in short, make any pronouncement about whether or not government officials and their relatives should be allowed to also be involved in COVID-19 tenders, or any tender for that matter?
To be honest with you, this is a very recent issue in terms of COVID-19 tenders and family members connected to people in politics being connected to those tenders. But what the bill would propose and what civil society is calling for is that the bill would prevent in some shape or form political interference. So that would cover the aspects of family of officials or friends of officials getting involved in procurement. So it would have to be some sort of blanket clause around who does business with the state and not necessarily just dealing with the corruption related to COVID.
Yeah. And Doc, were you privy to some of the comments that came through from the public? I mean, that process ended on the 30th of June. Are you able to give us, even if it's just a snapshot of what the salient concerns were from general members of the public?
From where we stand, it is just that corruption has been not only an ongoing problem, but a deep-seated problem. And we see that with the Commission of Inquiry into State Capture, people are concerned about not just the scale, but how far into government departments corruption is going. So the concern is not just that people at a high level are committing corruption, but essentially that it has become a culture that is being committed by almost anyone. And we have seen this with the COVID-related corruption, where even people who are not high-positioned officials, if they have access to resources, they also have a loophole to conduct corrupt activities themselves.
By the sounds of it, there hasn't been much movement from the President's office, at least with getting this bill approved. What then becomes the next step for civil organizations and organizations like yours to try and push for this to finally be approved?
It's precisely this action, so speaking to the media to let them know that there is a public procurement bill and that this needs to be pushed through. If there are amendments to be made, comments to be considered, this is the time to make sure that those actions are taken by government. Because I'm sure, as you understand, things don't just, or they shouldn't in government, just change overnight because you're reacting to something. There are a lot of things that need to be preempted when you are working with bills and working with policies. And we're saying, given the past that we're coming from, where procurement has been a long-standing issue, this is precisely the moment to ensure that the public procurement bill goes through, so that in future, we make sure that we avoid what we're seeing, where even during a pandemic, where people's lives are at stake, there is still a level of corruption that is just unjustifiable. So we're saying, let's get ahead of what is happening now, and let's make sure that it doesn't happen in future. Essentially, continue to put pressure on government to make sure that the right steps are taken with regard to bills like this, as well as ensuring that people who need help the most during this pandemic are reached.
Dr. Thokozani Chilenga-Butao, thanks very much for your time. Certainly appreciate your coming on to the AM report. Dr. Chilenga-Butao is a research associate with the Public Affairs Research Institute. Thanks very much indeed.